What would you do if three grown men mocked a struggling mom in public, and nobody stepped in? What if her little boy was watching, learning what silence looks like? One man in a hoodie didn't stay silent, and everything changed. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories. Nobody said a word, until one man decided silence wasn't an option. The supermarket was quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the aisles of discounted cereal and week-old bananas. Valley Mart, tucked into a corner of South Phoenix, wasn't the kind of place where stories began. It was where people went to disappear for a while, in between jobs, in between paychecks, in between hope. Near the self-checkout, a young woman in a faded gray hoodie stood with a toddler on her hip. Her sleeves were worn, her shoes didn't match, and her eyes, though focused on the card reader, told a different story. The little boy in her arms clung to her neck like he knew how to protect her, even if he was only 3. Behind her stood 3 grown men, loud, careless. Their jokes carried across the empty store like broken glass. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called, tossing a can of beans into his cart like it was a basketball. "You think they'll give me double stamps if I smile real pretty?" Another snorted, nudging the first. "Nah, man, she's just teaching her kid how to hustle early. Gotta respect that grind." Laughter erupted. The woman flinched, barely, but said nothing. Neither did the cashier. Neither did anyone else. Until a man in a black hoodie stepped out from behind the freezer section. He moved like someone who had nowhere to be but everything to protect. His hands were deep in his pockets. His steps, slow and certain. Derek Cole didn't come to Valley Mart to be a hero. He came for eggs and almond milk. But there are moments in life when a person doesn't get to choose why they're remembered, and this was about to be one of them. Derek Cole hadn't looked in a mirror in 2 days. He already knew what he'd see: bloodshot eyes, jaw tight with pressure, and sweat that clung to him like a second skin. 6 days straight of sparring sessions, endurance drills, and endless film reviews. 6 days of pretending he didn't hear his coach's voice echoing through his mind. "One wrong move, Derek, and you're back to the bottom of the circuit." He didn't respond anymore, just nodded, clenched his teeth, and kept going. That afternoon his body had begged for rest, but his fridge had other plans: empty shelves, a carton of eggs gone bad, and a half-spilled tub of oats. So he threw on a hoodie that still smelled faintly of sweat and Tiger Balm, grabbed his keys, and headed for Valley Mart. Not because he liked the place. He didn't. But because it was 20 minutes across town, far enough that no one would recognize him. Not fans, not trainers, not gym bros with iPhones. Just space. Quiet. Solitude. He parked in the farthest corner of the lot, the Arizona heat bouncing off the asphalt in waves. Inside the store, the air conditioning hit him like a punch. He pulled his hood lower and slipped in his earbuds, not playing anything, just white silicone shields against small talk. Eggs, oatmeal, almond milk, recovery drinks, nothing else. He moved like a ghost through the aisles, avoiding eye contact, avoiding thought. His mind was still somewhere back in the octagon, replaying combos and takedowns. Fighting was easier than existing some days. At least in the cage, the rules were clear. But life had no rules. And as he turned toward the self-checkout lanes, that reality hit him like a gut shot. The voices were unmistakable, loud, mocking, tinged with that performative cruelty that sounded like comedy but smelled like rot. 3 men, posturing like teenagers, circled a woman and her child with smirks and sarcasm. Derek froze mid-step. His grip on the shopping basket tightened. He didn't know the woman, didn't know what she was buying. But he knew that sound, the kind of laughter that made people feel small. He'd heard it aimed at his mother once, Years ago, when the food stamps didn't cover milk and rice, and someone behind her in line sighed too loud. He'd been 10, too young to fight, too old to forget. Derek glanced down at his hands, still taped from morning drills, knuckles raw and slightly bruised. This wasn't a cage. There were no gloves here, no bell, no ref. But sometimes you don't need rules to know when something's wrong. He took one slow breath, placed his basket down by the bottled water display, and turned his head toward the noise. The hoodie didn't make him invisible anymore. It was time to be seen. Marisa Vega balanced her toddler on one hip, a box of cereal under her arm, and a pack of diapers clenched awkwardly in her other hand. Her hoodie, once navy, now faded to a washed-out gray, had a small bleach stain near the sleeve, a reminder of long hours spent working laundry shifts downtown. Her son, Noah, nestled against her shoulder, thumb in mouth, eyes wide and quiet. She had done this dance before: swipe the EBT card, ignore the stares, leave before anyone said anything cruel out loud. Today, she wouldn't be that lucky. Behind her, 3 men hovered like vultures. One of them, the loudest, wore cargo shorts and a trucker cap backward like he was still clinging to his 20s. He lobbed a can of beans into his cart and shouted, "Look, I'm shopping too. Maybe I'll wink at the cashier and get double stamps." The others chuckled. The second guy chimed in, nudging his friend. "Come on, man, give her a break. She's just showing her boy how to hustle early." "Gotta start him young, right?" More laughter. Not playful, sharp, directed. The cashier's eyes flickered nervously but said nothing. Shoppers nearby glanced over and then quickly away, retreating into their carts and coupons like nothing was happening. Marisa kept her head low. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled her wallet free. She whispered into Noah's ear, trying to keep him calm, trying to keep herself from crying. Then came the sound that broke Derek's stillness, a loud kissing noise from behind the trio. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them leered. "Swipe that card twice, once for the kid, once for me." That was it. Derek moved. No dramatic gesture, no warning shout. He stepped out from the end of the frozen food aisle with a calmness that made him look almost out of place. He let his gym bag slide silently to the floor near a bin of energy drinks. His shoulders squared, his steps deliberate. They didn't see him at first. He walked right up to them, close enough to hear their breath, close enough for the weight of his presence to finally settle in. "Back up," he said, just 2 words, low, measured, controlled. The men turned. The one in the cargo shorts squinted at Derek, then gave a dismissive laugh. "You talking to us?" "I said back up," Derek repeated. "Let her pay in peace." Marisa looked up for the first time, startled. She blinked, unsure whether she should say something or stay quiet. Noah clung tighter. The second man smirked. "Mind your business, bro." Derek didn't move. "My business is watching 3 grown men act like high school punks around a woman trying to feed her kid. So yeah, this is my business now." A hush fell across the store. Somewhere near the candy aisle, one of the teens from earlier slowly lifted his phone, camera already rolling. The third man, the one who'd made the kissing sound, shifted uneasily. Man, he's just trying to flex. But cargo shorts wasn't backing down. Embarrassment was a dangerous emotion in men like him. He puffed his chest and took a step forward. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but nobody's scared of a gym rat in a hoodie." Derek's face didn't change. "Good, I'm not here to scare you, I'm here to stop you." A pause. Tension tightened like a drawstring. And then the shove. It wasn't hard, but it was angry. The man's palms hit Derek square in the chest, stiff and clumsy, fueled by bravado. Derek didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, his right hand shot up, not with a fist, but with control. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and stepped under with a clean shoulder turn. Within seconds, cargo shorts, was on one knee, his arm locked and useless, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. Derek leaned in just enough for the man to hear. "I could end this in 3 seconds," he said quietly. "But I'm not here for that." Then he let go. The man stumbled backward, humiliated but unharmed. "Leave," Derek said. "All 3 of you." The other 2 didn't need convincing. They grabbed their friend and backed away, muttering under their breath as they disappeared toward the exit. Phones were still up. Comments now filled the space where laughter had been. Marissa hadn't moved. She looked like she was still deciding whether to thank Derek or vanish into the floor. He turned to her, his voice softer now. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. Noah hid his face in her neck. "You don't have to thank me," Derek added. "Just finish paying. Go home safe." He stepped back, not in triumph, not in pride, but in peace. And then he said the words that would echo far beyond Valley Mart. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving." By nightfall, the video had already made its rounds, first on local Facebook groups, then Reddit, then Twitter under hashtags like Valley Mart Hero and You Don't Owe an Explanation. The footage wasn't flashy. No editing, no music. Just raw silence, a calm voice, and one man stepping between cruelty and quiet suffering. It should have been just another internet moment, viral for a day, forgotten the next. But something in the way Derek moved, the way he spoke, kept people watching. He hadn't puffed his chest. He hadn't shouted. He didn't throw a punch. He simply drew a line. The media caught on within 24 hours. Unidentified MMA fighter de-escalates confrontation in Phoenix grocery store. Local anchors called him a real-life superhero. Radio stations replayed his voice on air. Bloggers speculated on who he was. Derek, meanwhile, went back to the gym. He ignored his buzzing phone. Let the voicemails pile up. He hadn't done it for praise, and he sure wasn't going to let applause cheapen the moment. He wrapped his hands in silence and went back to sparring the way he always had. But across town, someone else was finding her voice. Marissa Vega had never thought much about writing. But that night, with Noah asleep beside her on a thin mattress, she opened her notes app and started to type. She didn't talk about the fight, not at first. She wrote about losing her job after her delivery route was cut during a restructuring. About how she tried to pick up hours at a laundromat that paid less than minimum wage once tips were divided. About how it felt to stretch cereal and rice through a week. About the time Noah, only 3 years old, asked, "Mom, do people hate us because we're poor?" She'd smiled at him then, told him no, but in truth, she didn't know the answer. Then she wrote about the man in the hoodie, how he didn't come to save her. He just stood there, steady, like a wall between her and everything trying to push her down. She ended the post with a single sentence. "Some people fight loud. Others stand still so the rest of us don't fall apart." By morning, it had been shared over 20,000 times. People commented with their own stories. Single mothers, veterans, grocery clerks, former foster kids, anyone who had ever felt small under the weight of judgment and circumstance. They didn't just share the video anymore. They shared her words. And slowly, the spotlight shifted. Not just on the man who held the line, but on the strength it takes to live life on the edge and still show up for your child. 1 week later, the noise had dulled. The hashtags slowed. The headlines faded. A newer scandal had taken over the feeds, and the world, as it always does, had moved on. But Derek hadn't done it for the world. That Friday, just after noon, he pulled into a cracked lot beside a modest community center in South Phoenix. The sun was already high, baking the pavement and warping the air around his windshield. He carried a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Inside, 3 pairs of gently used gloves and 2 sets of boxing shoes. Gear he no longer needed. Gear some kid could use better. He wasn't there to make a speech, just to drop it off and leave. But as he stepped into the hallway, he heard a voice call his name, soft, almost surprised. Derek, he turned. There, near a bulletin board covered in crayon drawings and paper flyers, stood Marisa Vega. A clipboard rested in the crook of her arm. Her hair was tied back, and this time there were no shadows under her eyes. Beside her stood Noah, gripping a juice box in one hand and blinking up at Derek with the weight of something he'd been holding in. The boy stepped forward, reached for Derek's pant leg, and said in a small but determined voice, "Thank you for helping my mom." Marisa laughed, not loud but light, the sound of a woman who'd remembered how to breathe. "He's been practicing that all week," she said. Said he wanted to say it just right. Derek crouched down, his smile easy and genuine. "You nailed it, little man." She looked at the bag in his hand. "Dropping things off." "Yeah," he said. "Figured someone might put it to better use than me." "That's your thing, huh, giving quiet. Loud doesn't always help," he shrugged. Marisa nodded, the weight of that truth resting gently between them. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about not owing anyone an explanation." He met her eyes. "I meant it." "I know," she replied, "and I believe it now. Took a minute, but I do." She reached into her clipboard and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, slightly wrinkled at the edges. "I wrote this for Noah, kind of a letter, kind of a promise. I want him to grow up knowing that survival isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of." She held it out. "I want you to keep it. You reminded me." Derek accepted it quietly, folding it with care and sliding it into the inner pocket of his jacket. From the corner, Noah tugged at his mother's sleeve. "We going home now?" Marisa smiled and ruffled his hair. "Yeah, baby, we are." Derek watched them walk toward the door, not as a viral moment, not as someone who had stepped in to save the day, but as a mother and her child moving forward. And in that moment, beneath the hum of flickering lights and the quiet buzz of a juice box straw, Derek felt something land deeper than any roar from a crowd. Peace. There were no cameras now, no phones held high, no live streams, no headlines, just the fading hum of a hallway, the soft creak of a closing door, and the echo of a child's footsteps drifting toward the parking lot. Derek stayed for a moment longer, his hand resting inside his jacket where Marisa's folded letter now lived, close to his chest, closer to something that didn't need a name. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just breathed, deeply. That was enough. Back in his car, with the windows cracked and the Arizona heat pressing in, Derek thought about something Coach Harris had told him a long time ago. After a particularly brutal match, when Derek was still learning the difference between control and rage, between survival and showmanship, his coach had sat beside him and said, "The hardest part of strength is knowing when to use it and when to stand still." He hadn't understood it then. But now he did. That day at Valley Mart hadn't been about dominance or defense. It wasn't a fight, not in the way he trained for. He didn't win anything that day. He just gave someone space, gave a little boy a memory, gave a woman the dignity the world tried to take from her. That wasn't noise, it wasn't glory, that was presence. And in a world too loud with judgment, shame, and fear, presence is a power few understand and even fewer choose to carry. But Derek Cole did, and he always would.